get started. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody of this lovely disclaimer. The purpose of this presentation is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as a recommendation to purchase or sell any security. MicroCap Club is not a registered investment advisor. MicroCap Club, its partners, members, subscribers, affiliates may or may not hold positions in one or more of the securities mentioned on this program, may trade in securities at any time. Do your own due diligence and seek counsel from a registered investment advisor before trading any security. I want to thank the MicroCap Club community for tuning into this business breakdowns conversation with John Swallow. He's the CEO and largest shareholder of Idaho Strategic Resources. It trades on the NYSE under the symbol IDR. My tag team partner today is a good friend of mine. His name's Luke Steckel. He's a member of the club. Luke's a private investor, also a small business owner. He's been actually, Luke, you've been a member since 2011. I think you were like the first or second member, probably, which is pretty wild.
I can't remember yesterday, so that's
you just take my word for it.
all right.
So anyway, the business we're breaking down today is Idaho Strategic Resources, which again trades under the symbol IDR. IDR was actually profiled by me back in 2013, and so it's crazy that it's been 10 years. So in a lot of ways, this is a 10-year update, John. But you know, Idaho Strategic is a domestic gold producer. It also owns the largest rare earth elements land package in the United States. The company is pretty unique because it's probably the only publicly traded company where you get both gold exposure from the production side and rare earth element exposure in one stock. So you've been looking forward to diving into both sides of those businesses today, and also the growth plans for both sides of those businesses for the future. John, thanks for joining us today.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks, Luke.
Before we get into the presentation, you know, John, your background's always fascinated me. How does a guy go from being a real estate appraiser to being a mining entrepreneur?
Well, there's plenty of textbooks written about it. Well, I started out as a kid. I grew up in North Idaho. So North Idaho, back in those days, it was either timber-based or mining-based. So along with the local mines up in the Silver Valley, you also had the Spokane Stock Exchange, which is where a lot of penny mining stocks were traded. So I used to walk by the local brokerage here when I was a kid and watch them change the share prices on the chalkboard. So that kind of dates me. But anyway, I kind of that's where one of my interests fell. And then as I came up, a little bit older than that, I guess a little bit older, I guess part of what really influenced me was during the Carter administration, a lot of the inflationary pressures. I learned a lot about fiat currencies as a kid, purchasing power and that kind of thing. So you could pretty much say that I was watching interest rates, real estate prices, commodity prices as like a fourth grader or sixth grader kind of a thing. I ended up buying my first stock when I was 14 years old. I was buying and selling silver bullion with my lawn mowing money. So, it's kind of been in my blood for a long time, but I've never really liked sort of the sales side of things. I've always liked kind of the doers, operators side. And when you look at like the real estate side of things, I liked being the guy that went out to determine something's value. But on the side, I also knew that my day job being a real estate appraiser was not how I was going to basically buy myself the freedom in the future. So I always knew my investing activities were going to be the things that allowed me to essentially retire or do whatever I wanted. And so my investing on the side was largely how we kind of got here. And I always had some ideas that were percolating since I was a kid. I always liked the blue sky of exploration and discovery. I just really, really liked that. But I always saw that most of these companies just didn't have a business behind them. And so I always call it revenue-backed exploration or something like that was always kind of in the back of my head. So I did that on kind of a personal and a professional level.
That makes sense. And kind of looking back in your experience, I mean, your first kind of big win, if I remember, was a company called Sterling Mining, which really was nothing that kind of turned into something pretty interesting. Maybe retell that story a little bit.
Yeah, so Sterling Mining was one of the old shells. I don't know if everybody remembers back in the 90s, but a lot of the penny mining stocks were turning into .coms. And the old guard from the Bunker Hill days had a little shell called Sterling Mining that had been a real player back in the day, but they didn't want to see it turned into a .com. And I was full-time appraising at the time, but I got approached by a couple of the old timers, and they didn't want to see it turn into a .com. And they said, "Well, what do you got?" And I'm like, well, first of all I have, the only promise I have is to try real hard and not issue a bunch of stock. Because really, Sterling Mining had a $350 a month royalty up near the Galena mine, and that's it. So I was not quitting my day job to go after growing it. But I thought, okay, this is your starter kit. And I did exactly what I said. We didn't issue shares. I ended up stepping aside after a couple of years because I was an individual that did want to kind of step in and make a run with it. But I also had sort of an unwritten deal with him that he couldn't issue shares or make any big business decisions without my input, which sort of meant approval in a roundabout way. And oddly enough, the Sunshine Mine went into receivership, and there was a salvage group in there kind of salvaging, doing things. And the shorter version of this story is that the salvage group went in front of the bankruptcy judge, and they had done some things that the judge didn't necessarily like. And I think, looking back, I think they were just trying to sort of end up with more of the assets instead of just doing their salvage job. The judge gets pissed at him, and I had written, this is the short version, I had written on a sticky note to the CEO of Sterling at the time. He wanted to try to do all these things to buy the Sunshine. I said, look, dude, I think the most we can raise is $1 million and a promise to do our best and maybe a royalty. I wrote it on a little sticky note. I gave it to him, and he told me I was nuts. And he was walking up and down the street yelling and screaming that John Swallow just cost me the Sunshine. And I said, well, I'm not signing off on anything other than you got $1 million in a try. So stick our name on the list with the bankruptcy court. Well, we were second on the list. The judge gets pissed at number one. And guess who's sitting at number two? Our $1 million and a promise to do well. And that's, in a nutshell, sort of how we ended up with it. But I just was thinking about this yesterday. Oddly enough, when I was in college, I used to trade stocks quite a bit back in the day. My favorite trading stock was actually Sunshine Mining. Sunshine Mining actually helped me pay my way through college. So I didn't even think about that till you kind of said to prepare something for my background. So anyway, I ended up stepping away. There's a recurring theme kind of through everything that we've done and I've done, and that was sort of the right. So this is like an 02, 03. So I didn't really necessarily have the operating experience that I wanted to have. And I was only a director, but the rest of the folks involved in Sterling, they're good-hearted folks, but they thought they could go forward with it. And I thought they were nuts. And so I stepped aside and sold my shares. And that was a pretty big win for us, along with a couple other ones. But, the thing about that one was it was kind of the right asset. And I don't want to say it was the wrong people, but it was sort of it was wrong in the sense that it was inexperienced people. So if you start looking through, that one was the right asset, wrong people. You go to something else I did later, it was sort of the right asset, sort of the right people, sort of the right timing, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think I first met you at Timberline Resources, which I believe, was probably a few years after that, after you monetized kind of the Sterling investment that you had. You were kind of sitting dormant for a while, and then you saw the opportunity to kind of take something else over and implement your strategy of having a revenue producing, profit producing asset, and also some exploration. And with that, I believe it was a drilling company, right?
Yeah. So we started out that Timberline. I had some people approach me and ask me if I'd take over Timberline, and this was like a 3-year process, and I said, well, no, I'm not going to do it. But I ended up sort of accumulating shares over time, and it didn't really have anything at all. But so then it was really clean, and I thought, okay, thing that produced revenue. We also didn't have any money, so put that on the one side of the ledger, and then the other side of the ledger. Now you got to go build something. So I put my own money in. We didn't get paid in the beginning at all, but we ended up making a deal on what was a little drilling company in Coeur d'Alene in the area. And I thought, okay, this is, your revenue base, plus one of the things that every exploration company, when you go to Vancouver and these shows, every one of their boards has a drill on it. Nobody can actually fulfill their business plan without drilling. So I thought, well, why not be a service provider to that? So we, and it was one of those things. It was a highly leveraged deal, but it worked. Then we had a mine that we had advanced. But one of the things that happened, one of the guys on our board also was the owner of the largest underground mine contracting firm in the US. And we had talked for a couple of years about buying his company and merging it into Timberline. And so you'd have a drilling company that was doing drilling for Newmont, some of the big guys. You'd have a mine that might, you could advance to production. Then you'd have a largest underground mine contracting firm. So this was working out really well, except for the timing. I was sitting in Wall Street in some guys' offices, trying to raise $55 million to buy an underground mine contracting firm the day that the wheels fell off in 07, 08. And so people were taking pictures off the walls and vacating their offices as I'm going there for a meeting to raise money. So that would be the example of timing being incorrect. But it also wasn't necessarily the right people either. They weren't necessarily in it. I don't think everybody had matured enough in their careers and their lives enough to kind of see where we were going and fully buy in. But again, good group of folks. Not to take up too much of the time, but one of the biggest lessons I learned out of that was we had I think it was like a $6 million note that it was a metals trading firm we had with, and so there was a put option on it where they didn't have to put it to me, but they did. So they fly out here, Coeur d'Alene, meet with them at like 11 o'clock at night. It felt like a total mobster kind of a shakedown. And I just said, dude, you're going to pull on this thread and it's going to pull a lot of other threads, because then the wheels start to come off. He's like, yeah, I know, but I got to do it. And I was like, okay. Anyway, I figured out through the drilling and a bunch of other things how to save and fix all of that. And we actually came out a hell of a lot stronger on the other side. But the other part of that too is we also had a fund that had a large share position and they got redemptions during that time. So our share price was not worthless, but it had dropped precipitously. So anyway, there was a lot of lessons learned in a lot of that. But one of the big takeaways was during the time of buying the underground mine contracting firm, or attempting to, I learned a ton about culture, underground mining. That was invaluable. And so that was, the kind of the starter kit for what followed after that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Now, I think it's important to hear your background because you've had 2 or 3 instances with small public mining companies on the services side, exploration side, raising capital side. And like you said, wrong timing on one, maybe wrong people in both of them. And with IDR, it's really your baby from the scratch. You built this one up. And so maybe that's a good entree into getting into the presentation. Why don't we go ahead and get the presentation started? And just as a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, you can ask them by clicking the Q&A button on the bottom of the Zoom screen and just enter them there, and then we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. But yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. So as Ian said, we're Idaho Strategic Resources. We focus on gold production and rare earth elements. One of the cool things about our company is we have 10 to 12 father-son teams, a number of uncle nephews. We have 2 husband and wife teams within the company. We've got an awful lot of people that are about my age in senior leadership, and a lot of younger guys in the 24 to 34 age range coming up, who are very dedicated and focused folks. So that's something that you'll kind of pick up a little bit on throughout, is that's one of our competitive advantages. And this is all part of the we live here, part of how we run our business and our culture and that kind of thing. Here's our forward-looking statements. And we have a bonus second page of forward-looking statements for the MicroCap Club guys. So So one of the things you'll figure out with us, if our name doesn't kind of say it, we have a very obvious Idaho-based approach. Idaho is one of those states that people don't fully realize, and I think they're going to realize in the future, that it's got the mineral endowment in Idaho is almost second to none. Nevada obviously is quite good, but Idaho is also ranked globally as one of the best mining jurisdictions. If Idaho was actually a country, so we're based in the northern area of Idaho in the Panhandle, where the Golden Chest mine is and the New Jersey mill. I'm coming to you from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I'm about 45 minutes from the mill and about an hour from the mine. The one thing you'll see on this map here is you'll also see our rare earth element projects. Those are down by Salmon, Idaho. They're right near and straddle the Idaho-Montana border. You'll kind of look at our shares outstanding. Our fully diluted numbers are actually pretty darn good for where we are in our business. We're pretty proud of where we sit on that front. One of the things with us is, I always say every year I look back in the year, and even if you look at my president's letters, I'll tell you, holy cow, we worked our butts off and we accomplished a lot. But if you look back at 2022 and 23, we had some pretty major inflection points. We actually changed our name. I think it was at the end of 21, started 22. We uplisted onto the NYSE in early 22. Our revenue profile was kind of kicking in then. Our rare earth elements projects were kind of kicking in then as well. But one of the things you'll see is we had a pretty major inflection point in Q3, Q4 of 22. Our revenue jumped. We basically what you saw was a culmination of a lot of different decision making, ownership, and that kind of thing. Mine sequencing was a big one. That was a big thing we learned a hard lesson on in Q3 of 22, of like production versus backfilling cycles and what makes you money and what doesn't. But anyway, if you look at from Q4 on, we're pretty consistently above 3 million in revenue and profitable. And one of the things we were pointing out at the mine the other day was that even like companies like Hecla and Core haven't shown this kind of profitability over this time frame. Our basic overview of our business is obviously gold and gold production, and then rare earth elements. One of the things that I like about gold is it's a universal store of value. And so when you have your base of value and your source of cash flow is a proven global store of value, in my mind, I don't know many things that are better than that. Especially with the times that we're in and the times where I think we're headed. If you look at, fiat currencies, no fiat currencies ever lasted forever. Purchasing power deterioration is basically the rule of the day. One of the things about the gold business is it has an extremely, extremely high barrier to entry. But once you get past that, there's always a customer for your product, always. And that's the thing that I look at. Like I look at some of these consumer product companies. I'm like, holy crap, I would never want to run that. I don't even understand how I would try to figure out how to sell into those markets. But if really betting on ourselves and overcoming these barriers to entry means I've always got a buyer on the other end, and I'm there all day long. Another thing, if you look at kind of where the BRICS nations are going, everybody's kind of moving away from the dollar. One of the things is if you look at over the last year or two, the central banks and our adversaries have been adding to their gold reserves. And another thing that's even been happening is the demand for gold and even the pricing mechanisms around gold is shifting from, like, say, New York and London and Zurich over to, to the east, like, Moscow and India, Russia, India, and China. So that's actually happening now. And then on the rare earth side, I think everybody's been seeing what's going on in the world and deglobalization and decarbonization. But one of the things you'll see on the rare earth side, and we started on the rare earth side 4 or 5 years ago, but it's something I've been following since the late 90s. I always knew that it was going to be something that was actionable, but it was just a matter of waiting for the right time. And right before COVID, right about the start of COVID, it was interesting. We were at a investment conference in Vancouver in January of 20, and I started to get this inkling about COVID and, you know, some of these things happen. And I started planning this out of my head, like what the heck happens? Like, you know, if this starts to grow, and Rob and I were at this conference together and we started talking and we're like, you know what, it's time to take that playbook off the shelf. And so the whole way back from Vancouver to North Idaho, basically the business plan around our rare earth element side of the business was born. And so we basically, we moved forward from that point pretty heavy. Our gold production is out of the Golden Chest mine, kind of as I alluded to earlier. On the kind of the top right of your screen, you're going to see those gray areas. Those are ore chutes. You can see where we're currently mining, sort of in the middle right there. Through the Q3, we've done about 6,000 ounces with an all-in sustaining cost of a little over $1,200 an ounce. And keep in mind, our all-in sustaining cost is kind of guts and feathers and everything. It includes our costs of running the rare earth exploration side of the business. So that everything that we do counts in our all-in sustaining cost per ounce of gold. One thing that I like to look at is people don't fully understand or realize or appreciate is we made a considerable effort to consolidate an entire gold district in North Idaho, something that hadn't been done in over 100 years, probably around 120 years. The Golden Chest sits on 220 acres, and our footprint is around 7,000 acres. So not only do we have blue sky in the rare earth element side of the business, we have a tremendous amount of blue sky on the gold side of the business. And that being said, we also have a considerable real estate package that even if let's just say there isn't gold on it, it has a tremendous amount of value, and that's completely unencumbered. So it took 4 years to assemble that land package. The New Jersey mill is where we process our gold, our ore. We actually produce a gold concentrate. Right, what you see in the middle photo there is our bag number 2,000. That was a couple weeks ago. So we put 2,000 of those 2,000-pound bags we've shipped to either Japan or South Korea for processing, which, you know, it would kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, but if you understood how our country works, it does. But anyway, the New Jersey mill was also the starter kit, sort of. You know, if you're going to start small and grow and build something over time and not overly dilute, it's hard to start small on a project if you don't already have a mill. And the New Jersey mill allowed us to start small. I wasn't going out and trying to raise $15 million for a mill before we even got started and diluting everybody out way too early. So it's pretty cool. And I gotta, because I know our guys will listen to this. The guys at the mill, they don't get a lot of glory, but they're the backbone of the company, and they definitely deserve a shout out here. They're kind of the guys that kind of keep it going. This slide is kind of self-explanatory. I'll just say that how about red equals bad? That's China's control over rare earth elements processing. It shows you where our country is right now. And this was a completely avoidable situation. We walked ourselves down this path. We even kind of helped we basically gave a lot of our technology to China. That worked maybe fine in a globalization area, but when you're in a deglobalization area, that's kind of like when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked. Well, that's the US. And so right now, what you're really looking at is there's one producing rare earth element miner and one rare earth element processor in our country right now. And we're looking at a situation where our government is essentially building the entire supply chain for rare earth elements from scratch. And if you've been in some of the meetings we've been in with the Department of Energy, the DoD, some of the national labs, it's not just something to take a look at in passing as far as every commodity cycle goes. This is a very real thing, and there's some very real concern out there. Our rare earth project overview, I'll kind of go a little quick because I know we're using up some time here. But it's the Mineral Hill project, the Diamond Creek project, and Lemhi Pass project. The Mineral Hill project, we announced just a short time ago some of our assays off of that project. And I would say they're pretty much the highest grade assays in the country. And I'd almost say they're the highest grade, some of the highest grade in the world. And it's been pretty interesting watching the Mineral Hill project advance. That's something that and the Mineral Hill project is one that we're actually going to be providing samples from in some of our government funding projects that we're working on with Idaho National Labs and Montana Tech and a few other groups. So that one's kind of keep a close eye on that one. Diamond Creek is a project we drilled last year. It actually already has a bit of a rare earth element resource as outlined by our government. The strike length that we defined on that was about 1.5 miles, and we have a drill program designed next year that'll extend that strike to about 3 miles. And then Lemhi Pass, this is the project that I think is the one that has the potential to be a very, very big project. All caveats included here. I think Lemhi Pass has the potential to be the next mountain pass, but all of the work is yet to be done. So definitely don't hold me to that. But one of the things about Lemhi Pass, one of the things you look at in the rare earth element critical minerals sector is you want to look at the elements that everybody really needs, and that's the neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbiums, and even samarium. Those are the metal magnet, or the magnet metals. And what you really want to look at is the concentration of those elements within the total rare earth element number. So if you have, say, a 4% total rare earth element number and you have 2% neodymium, that's a really good thing. Like even if you go to our Mineral Hill project, we might have 20% total rare earths. We still have 2 or 3% neodymium. You go to Lemhi Pass, we might have 4% rare earths, but we have 2% neodymium. And so those are really important numbers when you're advancing the projects the way we are. One of the things I will say too is all 3 of our projects are already listed in our national inventory. A little bit of project differentiation. I've really just kind of touched on it. What you're looking at on the left is a pan of monazite. That's the mineral that is basically the hosts the rare earth elements, and that the monazite is actually what the companies that are looking to advance their processing of the rare earths. The sources of monazite is what they're actually looking for right now. So that's a really important thing. This was literally a handful of soil below an outcrop, and we could not believe the amount of monazite that we found in that pan. The other photo is a trench at Diamond Creek. You'll kind of see all the colors there. And then the Lemhi Pass one over here just kind of further illustrates that magnet rare earth element enrichment. This right here is kind of one that I like. This is the one that if I was outside looking in that I'd be paying attention to. And this is the rare earth element comps. So I can leave it to folks to look at later, but one of the areas to look at is you want to look at the primary rare earth element mineral. MP Materials is bastnasite, at Idaho Strategic is monazite. One of the things that we pay attention to is the silicate side of it. So when you're looking at rare earth elements, this sector is going to advance different than I think most folks are used to in the commodity sector, and that the science part of it is actually going to lead in this phase and not necessarily the size of the deposit. Right now, with the folks we're talking to and how we're working, we're all working on the mineralogical level. We're not working on the deposit level. If the mineralogy works for what people are trying to do for separations and processing, you can then go forward. But if they do an analysis of your ore and it's got too many silicates or something like that in it, you're done. You're done before you start. So those are just some differentiations that I don't think that investors in this sector are fully aware of taking a look at. But this is a good slide when it shows you kind of the Idaho strategic sort of advantage, I guess. This is just our We Live Here slide. One of the things I'll touch on real quick, and then I'll hand it back over to Ian. But one of the things that we've found, we've been in a number of economic development meetings in central Idaho. And kind of our approach is, because we're working on 3 different funding programs now through, I'll just call it grant programs through the government. One of them is fairly large in partnership with Idaho National Labs and some others. And we're using ore from the Mineral Hill project as the test case. So, but one of the things that we wanted to do in our approach from the very beginning is when we hand somebody an ore sample, it's not just handing them a bag of rocks. that comes with the idea that they know that we know how to build a mine. They know that we know how to explore and process. They know that we grew up in mining and timber communities. They know that we have kids that we are trying to find jobs and stuff like that to make sure that, we kind of build on the future for these extractive industries. So when we hand somebody a bag of rocks, it comes with a hell of a lot more than just a, hey, here you go. And so part of our idea too is, if you hand them a sample and these are the ones that everybody starts to use, that's the one everybody starts to use. And so that helps us on that side of it as well. So we've been pretty quiet about that. But again, that's a little bit about our approach. And there's the contact us part, and that's kind of it. I'll stop sharing, Ian.
So John, I got a few questions for you. I think a big part of your story is that you took a while, but you did a real good job of like picking up assets real cheap. And it took you like 10 years to get the mine, the mill, and the land package together for the gold portion, the Murray Gold Belt. Um, then recently you got the rare earth land package before anybody really cared about it. Can you talk a little bit about like what kind of patience it takes and and how you see value where other investors or other companies may not?
Well, it definitely takes patience. I guess I would say, when we started with New Jersey, Grant's dad retired. I purchased Grant's dad's position, but they had $1,000 in the bank and $500,000 in debt, partial ownership of a mill and a mine, and nothing had been really developed. But it does take time. We started when gold was $1,180 an ounce, and so nobody wanted anything then. So we sort of had some time. We had, people weren't really holding us to a bunch of promises and stuff like that. Like you had time to start, you had time to make mistakes, you had time to grow and build it. But honestly, everything I've ever done is seeing life through a little different lens, and a little different way of adding value. And I think extrapolating down the line a long ways, but not rushing it till you get there to fully realize the value. So it's a lonely road, for a long time.
Um, I,
I don't know if that really answers it, but
no, it does.
it's hard to give away your secrets on how you identify things of value before anybody else.
Um, so since you're a gold mining company, I think investors like try to compare you, that the ones I've talked to like other junior miners or exploration companies, but I kind of see your business model as something totally different. I was wondering if you could like sort of speak to that and how you see that and how you compare to other juniors and exploration companies and what you actually are.
Yeah, we have the exploration component. We could, if you cut everything else out of our business, all of the operations, all of the rare earths, we have one hell of an exploration gold portfolio. We could be all of those guys. But building operations is tough. And that's pretty much where a lot of guys stop right there. What we were looking at is I've always looked at revenue-backed exploration model. And to be honest with you, years ago, I thought that was a drilling company. It wasn't production from gold, it was drilling. That model, I don't want to say I didn't care what the cash flow component was. I didn't necessarily care in the beginning, but the longer in the tooth all of our kind of the way the world's going got, I guess I would say, we took on the difficult task of building something. It's like 1 in 10,000 projects ever becomes a mine. And then it's something like 1 in 10,000 ever becomes a profitable mine. And so, when you're going to go down that path, I really, really like the idea of gold as a store of value. And if you can have gold as a store of value and gold as your cash flow component, you then have you can stay in the game longer than just about anybody else and not dilute out the shareholders. And so as long as you can stay in the game and ride out the cycles, now we have blue sky on the gold side, we have blue sky on the rare earth element side, and we we may have even a couple of other little areas that we're working on that could provide value down the line. I kind of like to always have what I call these buckets around that, it might be 5 years before that bucket's worth anything. But when it is worth something, holy cow. So one of the ways I told somebody on a mine tour the other day, I said, I feel like, it's like the Transcontinental Railroad is coming across the country, and we knew about it, so we got out to Denver and platted the entire town and subdivided all the lots, and then the train got there, and all these investors get off, and they're like, hey, but we were there first.
Could you add a little bit to, I know you mentioned the "We Live Here" mantra and your culture for your company, and how you differentiate yourself from other mining companies in that the idea of your culture?
It really stems back to when we had the drilling business. One of the things I didn't like about the drilling business was that you're sending guys down into the middle of Nevada working 20 and 10 schedules. They're away from their families. You'd watch families fall apart. You'd watch relationships fall apart. And I just didn't, everybody chooses their own path, but that was a tough one. When I was growing up in North Idaho, when timber and mining ended sort of in the 80s, it was last man out, turn off the lights. And so you had an entire generation of younger folks, including myself, where the adults had not planned for the future at all. I was pretty pissed off when I left high school just because the opportunities were gone. And so it's one of the things I think you can see across our company is you've got a lot of leadership guys that are my age that have had to go work in Alaska or Nevada while their families were here, and they miss football games and dances and just stuff like that and family events. And so I really, really focused on that. Like I'd rather focus and be the right size and have that as our backbone than be bigger and you're just throwing money at people to do things for you. We have kind of a mantra that people don't want to be here, then don't be here. Kind of the same way with people investing. If they don't want to invest, then just don't invest. It's not, what we do is we kind of lay out our story, and then people choose to work for us or people choose to invest. And then that's kind of how we do it. Travis, my son, who's also kind of heads up business development, had a guy call the other day and said, hey, tell me why I should buy your stock. And he knows our talking points. Like, no, I'm not going to tell you why to buy our stock. I'll talk about our company, and then you decide why you're going to, if you want to buy our stock. So, but the We Live Here side of it is actually working. We were in a meeting with the Department of Energy earlier this year, and there was like 3 or 4 other exploration only companies sitting there in the rare earth space. And they gave us each 10 minutes. When Rob and I stood up and started talking, the head guy there has us talking for 45 minutes. I pointed to production. I pointed to that we have a mill that makes the concentrate. I pointed to the fact that we've got water conservation awards from the DEQ. I pointed to the fact, our safety record's pretty darn good, and everybody goes home every night, and how many family members work at our business, and we're in Idaho. And, and now when I go down into the community of Salmon, they look at that. Like if a mom, I've actually literally talked to a mom that runs economic development for Lemhi County. And, she talks to me about her kids and stuff, wanting to keep her kids in the area and provide jobs. And I'm like, man, I got that t-shirt. We will work with you on that. So anyway, I don't think that answered your question fully, but it's a little bit of it.
No, thanks, John. Maybe switching to the gold production side and the profitability. I mean, you kind of outlined it in that one slide. The profitability has been increasing over the last 3 or 4 quarters. What's been driving that increased production and profitability?
I would say the sequencing of, so when you're mining underground, when you're done mining an area called a stope, you go in and you backfill. And when you're backfilling, you're not making any money revenue mining. And so getting the sequencing down was a key component, along with changing the schedule of our schedules up actually was a big one. But also the H vein, entering into the H vein is an area of the mine that we had discovered that we weren't really mining from. And developing into the H vein and mining from that area of higher grade also helped. So you had a kind of a combination of a lot of a lot of learning curve and ways of doing things coming together, along with a little bit of a higher grade area and efficiencies, and really in a pretty stable gold price.
And what are your plans for continuing to increase the gold production and profitability of the company?
We made a pretty big jump this last year. We went from, say, roughly 2 million a quarter in revenue to 3, and we went to profitability, and production kicked up as well. So you had kind of a 50% increase in revenue in 1 year, and it's really going to depend. Excuse me. Sorry. It's going to depend a lot on our ability to kind of more of the same, and I really think that that's where we're headed. We feel good about the future of the H vein. We feel good about the areas that more of we call hanging wall veins that are similar. We're doing a drill program right now to test areas down and off to the north and east, and some of the paymaster stuff we've talked about in the past is going to be in future production. So our goal is to get to 10 to 15,000 ounces a year in production with, say, an all-in sustaining cost of 12 to 1,500 bucks. But that's going to be a process. Our goal wasn't to get to 3 million and stay there. That's now the new floor. It was a prior ceiling. Now it's a floor. And the good thing is that culturally, everybody now knows they can do it. And now everybody wants more.
Okay. Let's, Luke, why don't we switch over to the rare earth side of things and go ahead and start firing.
Okay. How's your the rare earth land package different from others, and where do you think you stand nationally?
So I think how one of the things is I'd say we were largely first in jumping into the sector, or pretty close to first. There were some other players too, but a lot of the work that we're building upon is work that was already done by our government in the 50s and 60s. So a lot of the discovery of the rare earth element land or projects and prospects in our country was actually done in the 50s through government funding when they were searching for uranium and thorium. So there was a whole lot of that actually going on back then, and a lot of that was documented. There was a lot of money spent back in the day, and we're building upon a lot of that prior work done by those guys. But right now, I would say we have the largest rare earth element land package in the country, but probably I would say we're in the top 3 for quality as well. It's interesting. We went to an international rare earth element conference, and we're walking around, and people are looking at our badge, and they go, "Oh, you're the group that has Lemhi Pass." That's how they knew us. You never know what people think of you, and we're like, Then we've had some visits for some fairly large players, that want to talk more about Lemhi Pass and our projects and that kind of thing. So it's, I'm obviously talking my own book, but I'd say I wouldn't trade our land package for anybody else's. I can tell you that.
So along those lines, it seems like there's a lot of money being thrown at figuring out processing technologies. But don't you, isn't the challenge going to be matching those processing technologies to the actual ore? And how do you fit in with that? How do you see that?
No, that's exactly right. That's been one of our frustrations but the government's been hesitant to, I call it resource definition. The government doesn't want to come fund drilling just because it sounds bad. But one of the things so they leave it, up to industry. So they're talking about everything except the source of the ore. They want to process. We even had an instance where one of the labs was actually importing rare earth elements from China in order to study processing techniques, which is ridiculous. That was about a year ago. So now we've kind of rounded out the bottom, and the government definitely sees the need to get involved. They're putting out a lot of different funding programs, very large funding programs. They are still focused largely on processing, some on extraction. But one of the things, I also look at it as a huge opportunity for us, because if we can hand somebody samples from our projects and they know that we're a mining company that they're getting them from, all of a sudden that trust level increases 100-fold. If we're, say, a junior exploration promoter group, there's a lot of people don't want to get involved with them no matter what their grades are. And so just nobody wants to take that career risk, sort of. So I actually look at some of this as an opportunity. One thing I will say is I was on a call, that was a couple months ago. They were introducing us to the new undersecretary of the Department of Energy. And at the very end, I mean, it was a good call. The guy was very, very interested, but he asked me what I thought. I was the only company on this call. And I'm like, wow, something's strange here if our country's relying on John Swallow to save it. But anyway, he just said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I go really where we need to go next is you need to start calling resource definition, research and development, and we really need to start getting some dollars coming all the way down to the deposit side. I know it's Captain Obvious. I think we're headed that way, but we're not there yet. But I've also seen this gap as being a huge competitive advantage for us."
Nice. So you talked a little bit, and you had some nice charts about the 17 rare earth elements. Um, can you speak a little bit more to like which ones are the most important and most valuable, and what do you think the ones are going to be that are most economical for IDR to pursue?
So the interesting part, I spoke a little bit on the magnet rare earth element concentrations. So you can look at they call it NdPr TBDY. So neodymium, praseodymium, terbium, and dysprosium. And then we've also tossed samarium in there a little bit because it's also one of the metal elements. Lemhi Pass right now, the basically the 50% concentration of neodymium in your rare earth element samples, and this isn't my number, this is coming from the Idaho Geologic Survey, that's among the best in the world. That kind of a concentration of neodymium, that's your moneymaker right there. It's the neodymium, praseodymium, terbium, dysprosiums. And what I'm finding though, because one of the things I look at, and this is where it goes back to our mill and making a concentrate, when I talk to these guys at INL and with the DOE and stuff, I said, look, we just need to know what kind of a concentrate we need to focus on and what's the value of that concentrate. So how much of it needs to be neodymium, that kind of thing. Like what's the business side of this? So what I would look at though is I would look at the monazite side as well. So monazite is actually the mineral, the Alukas and the Linuses and stuff like that, some of these other groups are actually focused on for the processing side. That's what they're looking for right now. So they're not looking at a lot of different kind of minerals out there. They've already built a business around processing monazite and extracting rare earth elements. And that's really where the money's flowing right now. And that's essentially why we're so excited about what we see at Mineral Hill and Lemhi Pass, is it's basically the base is monazite.
So like all this development, you've like obviously cultivated like great partnerships and working relationships with government and academia, and like I know you've mentioned before that they need to be authentic and non-promotional in their work. Can you add any color to those relationships, and like what can we sort of expect going forward?
I think it's kind of interesting. We were on a call. No, actually, we were meeting with some folks from INL in Salmon, and I was talking to them about, we've kind of held back. We didn't want to put, their work at risk. Like when we're talking about stuff, you don't. It's not everything's a news release, even though it probably could be. But we kind of take our time on the relationship and build it and build that trust. Even with the politicians, we've done that. But it was interesting. One of the guys at INL said to me, he goes, "Okay," he goes, "but there will be a time that you need to promote." And I said, "Okay, I got it. I'm just waiting for you to tell me when that time is, because I don't want to risk their funding or their relationship with somebody, get out in front of it too early." But I want to be able to yell up from the rooftops when we get a chance. It's not like there's anything major going on, but I would say the culmination of all the work and the relationships we've built, we've done probably a decade's worth of work in 1 year. I mean, it's incredible where some of these relationships have gone, and they're good folks. I mean, we're dealing with some people that are genuinely trying to solve some problems for our country, and it's really cool to see. And so when we get a chance to really start talking about it, which I'm hoping is pretty soon, but they'll be talking about it too, and that kind of stuff. So we've just been reserved in our approach, as you probably aren't surprised by.
When you, I'm going to look at some of the questions we have coming in, and one of them is, when you look at the rare earth elements side of the business, how should investors look at that opportunity? How should we think about that playing out over the next 2 or 3 years? What are your hopes, aspirations, for that?
So I think there's there's portions of the rare earth stuff that I think we can handle from start to finish as some of these processing technologies and stuff like that move forward. But quite honestly, there's some of it that I think is going to take, I think some bigger players will be interested as we advance. But I think that's going to also be part of the government funding for processing and those kinds of things. Whether we joint venture, honestly, what I'm looking at is I want to do it with as little dilution as possible. And so we're kind of looking across the board at whether it's joint ventures, earn-ins, that kind of thing. But I think you're going to see more of the same from us, but we're going to see, instead of us talking about samples that we've got, you're going to start to see now we're working with this group on processing and extraction. And then you're going to see, and that's going to be at different projects. And then you're going to see, I think you're going to see us working with somebody to really get after Lemhi Pass. I mean, that's like 10 square miles. That's a massive project. And so you're going to see those, you're going to see us advance, I'd say very logically, but you might see each one of our projects, it might have a little bit of a different end goal in mind. Mineral Hill could be very similar to a narrow grade or a narrow vein, high grade underground gold mine, just like what we do at the Chest. Lemhi Pass might be a heck of a lot closer to Mineral Pass in its future than it is the Golden Chest, and that may not be us. But I'm the largest shareholder. I want to see us have a piece of everything.
Mm-hmm. And I think some investors looking at it and just the scale and scope of what you could have, they're trying to get their arms around. How do you fund all of this? They're thinking about like dilution or whatever.
Yeah.
Like how do you think about that? Like moving forward, do you think the rare earth side of things will be mainly, hopefully, funded by the government or partners?
Yes, I think both. There's not a chance in hell I want to go out and try to raise $100 million and dilute ourselves out. We have this term we use in the office. We've done a good job of not, we call it institutionalizing our shareholders. You look at some of these mining companies, or really companies, once they start using their shares as too much of a currency and they're really just focused on advancing something to get to production, but the shareholders are kind of done a long time ago. We've done a really good job, I think, of not institutionalizing our shareholders, and I have no plans of doing that in the future. But we will work. We're actively looking for partners, but I also think we've got to be patient and let some of this government funding happen. I mean, we run into these meetings ready to solve all the problems, and then reality sets in, and so then we got to back up. It's like if anybody's gone to try to permit a house, you don't want to have that lumber package showing up before you got your permits ready. So we really focus on being a good partner, being patient. We provide a lot of flexibility. We fill in around the gaps where needed. But as far as the dilution goes, I've had this in the back of my head for quite a while. I do not want to needlessly over dilute. We've gotten to where we are by doing smaller targeted raises, and I can see us still doing something like that. But I definitely don't want to go after the big project just for the sake of being big or whatever.
You mentioned before in the presentation that there's companies that are already utilizing your ore to build out technologies, in rare earth or even other areas. Can you talk a little bit about that? You can go into as much detail or little detail as you want, but I think that's an interesting component of it, because if you have multiple companies building out technologies that are utilizing your ore, they're obviously plan to utilize your ore a lot more in the future. And that's kind of an interesting storyline.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, basically it's win-win situations on that side of it. We're helping them out. They're getting a good source of ore. Like I said before, you also have the fact we're an operating mining company behind that ore. So if that ore works for them, and it becomes something that's the standard. Like I've looked at this, like how do you not brand our ore, but sort of, how do you become the standard that people are looking at? And it's just in its infancy. I mean, we're literally in its infancy right now. And so we've had different groups come out, and we've done tours and walk them around, and but then you look at their processes, how they get through analyzing stuff, and we're like, it's just one of those things where, we're pretty nimble, we're pretty scrappy, but we're also there to help provide the right samples with the right, when you need to have the right company providing the sample. You can't be where you hand it off and then that other guy has to go do everything. We're active. We don't just hand something off. We're very active with them after we do it.
We had another question that came in. It says, if I understood you correctly, Congress is mandating that domestic rare earth element supply chains are built by 2026. How long would you guess for remining starting? How is that even possible in your eyes?
So we've talked about this ever since we learned that. I mean, it's virtually impossible. How about that? Why don't we just start there? So now we're going to back up with, we've got the impossible task. Now, how do we tackle it? And it's not that we're not going to do it. It's just going to take a little longer. Our approach now, like it's a real thing. I think if, and you talk to Rob about this, we were just talking about it yesterday. He's like, well, by 2026, he goes, anything that's been advanced is going to have a lot more value than it does now. And we kind of hold that idea. But one of the things we focused on is getting all of our projects as close to what quote unquote shovel ready. Because I think if we hit a time where the wrong headline comes across, the wrong plane gets shot down, the wrong country invades the other country, I think the government's going to look and say, what do we got? What's shovel ready? What do we got? And I think that's when the money starts flowing. But we're not banking on that, but I think that's a fairly good scenario. So yeah, the 2026 thing is something we all talk about, even on these mine tours when we're showing guys around. It's real interesting. Everybody sees it, and there's a lot of groups working towards solving this problem. But I don't care what anybody says. There's not a chance in hell. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think we're going to be ready by 26. I think we're going to be well along the path.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing is, I think as a citizen of our country, we have rounded out the bottom in the mass realization that we've got some challenges in front of us, and I feel good about that. And now we're addressing them. Whereas if you asked me a year ago, I wouldn't have said the same thing.
Okay, well, let's leave it there. John, thanks for the conversation today. Tell us more about the company and both sides of the business. Luke, thanks for asking some questions as well. It's been fun.
Thanks, both of you.
You bet. Thanks, Luke.
All right, take care.
See ya.